Scientists are warning that most coffee species are at risk of extinction due to climate change. It's a sobering thought if you're one of the country's 11 million coffee drinkers, with climate change already affecting the production of some commonly consumed species. For more on this, I'm joined by Director of the Queensland Alliance for Agriculture and Food Innovation, Professor Robert Henry. Professor, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
So this morning I made a coffee. I must admit I don't know what variety it was, but are you saying that everyday drinking coffee could be at risk of coming off the shelf?
Well, climate change is certainly adversely affecting the quality of coffee and the ability to produce those high quality coffees that have traditionally come from high altitudes in the tropics, areas where rising temperatures mean that we can't necessarily produce that coffee quality into the future.
So what are we drinking mostly, particularly in Australia? Is it Arabica, that kind of thing?
Yes, we drink mainly Arabica and Robusta. That's the other species that's widely consumed, but there's more than 100 out there in the wild.
And some of those more wild species, as I understand, are some of the ones potentially at risk. Are any of those consumed as well?
Only to a very limited extent, but they represent a resource that we could use, of course, to breed better Arabica and Robusta coffee, or maybe provide alternatives if we need to produce coffee in different environments in the future.
Yeah, so why are these wild coffee varieties, dozens and dozens of them, why are they so important in terms of supporting the crops that we do drink a lot of?
Well, I think it's the same for all of our crops. The wild relatives represent that genetic diversity that we have to call on when the environment changes or when a new disease arises, and try and find the genetic resistance we need to cope with those new situations. So genetic diversity is very important to all of our crops.
And if some of those more popular crops like Arabica and Robusta kind of fall off a cliff, can we harness some of these other varieties? Are they drinkable?
Well, some of them are to a limited extent, but I think there's potential for breeding them, and we may have no choice if the climate moves against our current species.
Often with crops that are at risk of extinction, people talk about things like a seed bank and trying to at least keep some of the seeds safe. Is that an option to try to preserve these sorts of crops?
Yes, certainly conservation in that sort of way is possible. It does seem at the moment, though, for coffee, those measures are not in place, and that most of the species out there are at risk, and we haven't actually yet got to collecting them in that way.
And so what do we need to do to ensure that, I guess, the coffee crops that most of the world drinks are preserved?
Well, we always have two options: to try and preserve them in the wild, or to try and collect them and store them, as you suggested, in seed banks or plant banks. And we need to really look at a combination of both of those strategies to conserve coffee genetic resources.
And just finally, given the sort of threat that we're seeing in terms of the coffee products that we're drinking, what could that do to prices?
Well, certainly it has potential to push the price up, especially for high quality coffees. And so we really do need to understand how to produce that and what types of environments we need to deliver that high quality coffee that consumers, particularly in Australia, are demanding.
Professor Robert Henry, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks very much for your insights.
Thank you.